Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Love Procurement podcast. My name is Philip Ideson. I'll be your host for this conversation. Today, I'm glad to welcome David Khuat-Duy, who's the founder and CEO of Ivalua, to talk a little bit about procurement and procurement technology and how those have progressed. So first of all, David, I want to thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, just to get things started, I wonder if it would be possible if you just give a little bit about your professional experience, a little background into your professional experience for anyone listening today.
Yeah, sure. So I have an engineer background.
Mm-hmm.
I worked a little bit I did a PhD in math. So I was very deep into math and very theoretical stuff. And then I decided to change and go more in the business side and more working with company and help them solve their problem. So I was working within PwC, a consulting firm, where I worked on helping company, especially implement technology for procurement, supply chain, production planning, this type of issue they have. And at that time, it was in the 97, 97. So internet was just starting, but it was still early. And I felt that there was some technology, but they were not based on this new thing that was internet. So that's kind of where I felt it may be a good time, and there is a disruption coming with that approach of having collaboration across company on supply chain, on procurement. And so this is where it all started, and when I decided to found Ivalua.
I remember those days when it was, black screens and the DOS-based ordering systems and mostly faxing. Back in those days, I would spend, days and days faxing orders, parts orders to suppliers in the automotive business. And that was the only way that we could communicate with them. So we've come a long way since then.
For sure.
And we're going to talk about that and that journey today, actually. But I want to ask, because it's the theme of the podcast, is why do you love procurement?
Well, I guess I really liked working on real issue that company have, and I felt that procurement was one space where people were not paying that much attention as much as the other department, and I felt there was a lot to bring to help procurement, and by doing that, I kind of fell in love with the complexity of the problem and the challenges they have to deal with, because they are not seen as the main function for the company. Often sales is seen as more strategic, but at the end, procurement is very critical, and there's a lot of the strategy that can be decided within procurement for companies. I mean, in some way, the way you spend your money matters a lot, and you can make a lot of important choices in the way you decide to engage with your suppliers and your supply chain too.
And there are few, if any, functions or areas of the business thing that touch so many of the other areas of the business. That means every day is different, which I think is really interesting for a procurement professional. But it's the breadth of the impact that we can have when we get it right.
Absolutely. I come from a very scientific background. I love complex problem, and I think this is a complex one. It's not a pure technical complex one. It's the fact that this collaboration across different departments is not easy to solve, especially from a technology perspective. So finding way to have procurement leverage all the value that they can find within a company and collaborate with all these departments is a very difficult problem. So.
Yeah. Now, you talked very briefly about founding Ivalua, I think right around the 2000 mark, as we were starting to see the internet was just starting, and we're starting to see the opportunity of kind of the next generation of procurement technology products. But what was the initial product like? What was the version 1 of Ivalua?
So initially, the idea it was a lot about marketplace. So it was a lot about creating websites where you could have multiple buyers, multiple sellers, suppliers collaborating together. So that was the start. But very quickly, I realized that buyers are the one making the decision. So I reoriented very rapidly the company by providing the solution for large company. And maybe this was also, I don't know by chance, but our first customer was a very large bank. So it was the third bank in France. It's called BPC. It's still a customer to us. And they really wanted not to just solve one problem and have one feature, which is, doing sourcing event with suppliers. It was not just about that. It was by digitizing their full procurement activity. So it was also managing the activity of all the buyers, how they split their work, how they can monitor what they are doing, how they can report on the data they were gathering, managing their supplier database. So it's a lot of feature they needed, and that's how it started. I mean, it started from this big customer who really drove us in how we developed the tool. And maybe that's the story of Ivalua. I think in the end, we didn't focus on, okay, we need to build that feature because that will be the big feature that everyone will want. We were just saying, okay, we don't know what we don't know, so let's talk with customer. They will tell us what they need, and we will build a solution for them, not a generic problem.
Yeah, so it's very much led by customer demand. So understanding what your customers wanted and building from there. And I imagine that at the beginning, when you set out and perhaps it was, about marketplace, and then you looked at saying, well, maybe we're going to focus on the buy side, but then suddenly to be looking at the entire procurement process, was that overwhelming to start with? Was that like, this is a lot more than we thought we were going to be getting ourselves in for? How did that kind of evolution, or how did that kind of drive the continued evolution and growth then of Ivalua?
That was a big challenge for sure. It took time. I mean, I think it takes a lot of time to build the full suite. So it really took time, but that was the main goal. So we didn't do that in a few years. It took multiple years, but we were doing that along the way. So as soon as we finished one problem they had, we tackled the second one. And the important part about doing it is to build a platform with it. Because when you build the platform, the generic module, like all the workflows, all the analytic part, when you have that building block being built along the way, then everything you can build on solid foundation for all the new features. And so that the way I found is taking time to build all this. But at the end, you don't lose the final goal, which is answering to their next challenge.
So that was definitely, that was driving the vision and driving kind of where you made your product investments. Also, I think important to note, as you said, you built the platform. So then once you have that kind of code base, that's allowing you to probably be a little bit more flexible in terms of what you do on a module by module basis. Whereas you're not necessarily having to look outside to bring things in. You can build it all on the platform, on the foundations that you've built.
Absolutely. I would say that also at some point you have no choice, because when you're on the first customer, you could say, okay, I built something tailored for that customer and build a feature. But the more customer you have, the more you have either to manage multiple versions or to build a very flexible and configurable platform. Which is really what we aimed at. It took also a lot of years because this is very complex, but I think this is what we achieve and one of the big differentiator we have.
Yeah, I think an acknowledgement as well that there is no there's no such thing, I hesitate when I say this, no such thing as best in class. What I mean by that is everyone's needs are unique to their organizations. And so those that succeed, do best in tailoring what they've got to the needs and the culture and the specific requirements of their business, rather than saying, this is what I've got, and I'm going to try and push this into my organization and hope that my organization changes around what I'm pushing into them.
Yeah, actually, you need both, because you cannot just come with just the building blocks and say, okay, what do you need? So you need, with many customers, after you have experienced some first, to come with something where you push what you think is good. But the power is then, if they say, no, this is not how we work, we want a different approach, yes, you have the flexibility to make that happen. So this is, you need both, and this is the tricky part of that.
Now, we've seen a lot of changes since 2000. Obviously, I think the cloud and SaaS are just a couple within the software space. So what are some of the most influential market changes that you've seen that have taken place over your journey at Ivalua, and how did you choose to respond to those?
It's a long journey. So there has been at some period, indeed, some inflection where the market went in one direction rather than the other one. For example, when we started, there was no, as you mentioned, there was no cloud offering, the public cloud that we know now. There was no. So we had to build our own cloud infrastructure. So we still have it, and it's very efficient because we tailored it to our platform. And so it's very also cost effective and all of that. Now, I would say I wouldn't advise a new company to do the same, because it takes so many years, and you can go but for efficiency, it's really great. So there was this inflection. There was the inflection, also the change when everything was licensed, suddenly it go, as you mentioned, it goes SaaS. So we did that very well. Now there is also another thing where, for a long period of time, there was these two domain, which is the upstream part, the more strategic sourcing, and the more transactional part, the P2P part. From the very early, we started with the sourcing. That's the first module we did. But very early, we felt that there is a lot of synergy by having both. When you do a sourcing, you need to be able to see what happened already in terms of transaction with your suppliers. You need to understand the spend you've done and how you did it. So having all of that in one platform, we were convinced very early that it was very important. And I would say for many years, people say, no, there's two markets and you have the best of breed you need. And now people are realizing that it's really valued and that it's a market trend. So this is one example. It's the same for the flexibility. For a long time, people were saying, no, you need to push out of the box things, and people had to adapt to that. And now they are seeing this low code, no code approach that we did very early, and we felt it was really, really great.
Well, it's interesting when you look at kind of the whole process and how you digitize the whole process, and you talk about the upstream. When you're looking at things like the sourcing, even category management and things like that, supplier relationship management, those are where value is created, but you actually need the foundations to get data and also to build kind of the adoption internally of the procure to pay side of the spend analytics. And so it's easy to go and say, I need to go upstream because I want to create value. But if you don't have those other elements of it, then you're not really positioning yourself with the best insights and intelligence that you can then make yourself more impactful on the upstream. So the downstream kind of needs to flow first before you can, in most cases, I think, before you can truly be as successful as you can on the upstream side.
Yeah, absolutely. At the end, we feel that there is a big value for procurement to have kind of one system of record. And I can give you another example where we have a strong conviction that in some way having indirect and direct procurement on the same platform brings a lot of value for the way spend is managed and the processes and the analytics. this is, I would say, it's getting to this, but on the market, but it's still not obvious that people are all in alignment with that approach. But I think over time, it will show the value of having that. So this is that kind of choice we made along our journey, and at some point, and we feel at the end we made this choice with the customers we had.
Yeah,
they were asking for that, so it made sense.
And I think that's one of those things that I think that organizations have been slower to digitize. Well, when I say digitize, to look externally to digital solutions for direct procurement, over and above just using ERP, for example.
Yeah.
But that I do see that being a trend. I started in direct materials 23 years ago. And, it's always kind of surprised me that the indirect side has been where a lot of the investment in ProcureTech has been. On the direct side, I think there's a lot of catch up to be done. And it's probably a matter of it's when rather than if, I feel. But there seems to be more interest, at least in the market, than there has been ever before in looking at digitizing the direct side as well as the indirect side now.
Yeah. And the tricky part is that it's because it's spend and procurement, you could say, oh, yeah, you just put direct with indirect and it will work. But actually, no, the features are really different. The volume are different. The way you interact with the direct
like the collaboration,
it's really different from indirect. And what's at stake is not the same.
And I think the change management journey is harder as well, because there's a lot more fear of getting it wrong. If you get it wrong, and I use air quotes on wrong, but if you have delays caused by technical implementations on the indirect side, the impact of the business is not what it would be on the direct side. Where on the direct side, one thing can shut your factory and your customer's factory down for a long time. So I'm sure there's a lot more risk that comes with the fear of change on the direct materials side.
Absolutely right.
Now, I think when we look at the market at the moment, there's procurement tends to go through these periods of really active M&A activity. And, it's been a cycle, and we'll see kind of where we are as we're here in 2024, the beginning of 2024, and what 2024 brings. But what's been your perspective on kind of sitting and seeing all the M&A that goes on in the procurement tech space?
That's also a topic where maybe we had chosen a different path from many of our competitors, mainly because also I feel that, to be honest, I like the journey more than absolutely achieving a certain goal. And for me, building I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I'm an engineer. I love procurement and I love the technology. So building a new feature, building a new module, I love that. So maybe I was not eager to get, I need to have that feature, so let's buy it, will be quicker.
Right.
That's not how we did it. So in the end, our growth has been organic and has been really by building all the feature and not doing a lot of acquisition. I'm not saying acquisition is not interesting. I would say sometimes if you're a little bit late on a topic and you feel it's really a must-have and there is a good opportunity, maybe, but I'm convinced that there is a cost of it. Not just the cost of acquisition. I'm thinking about it slow down the time you have to digest, to integrate, and sometimes you don't integrate on this. You keep the different technologies, so you have a patchwork of technology. I think it can happen, but not too often. I know so many of players on that market who really did a lot of merger, acquisition, and at the end, 1 + 1 = 1 and not 3.
Yeah.
I've seen that a lot. So maybe we're almost the only one who have, maybe there's few, but who have not really did a lot of acquisition, and that we end up by getting in a good place on the market.
Yeah. And I think that it has a cultural impact. You talked about the impact of multiple acquisitions, but when we go all the way back to what we talked about earlier in the conversation around that technical base, So you've got without having kind of different solutions now plugging into that and trying to make them all work, that gives you more flexibility in terms of how you build and what you build and how it all connects with each other. It may just be a slower journey because you're building everyone to kind of fit your foundation, as opposed to trying to accelerate just through bringing in acquisitions.
Yeah, that's how I think about it too.
So how do you decide on the right pace of growth? It sounds like, by building steadily, by being really careful, by taking a lot of customer feedback in your growth journey are things that are really important to you and important to the culture of Ivalua. So how do you balance that with, that ever kind of, I don't want to say need, but, in how quickly you then translate that into growth for the organization?
Yeah. We like to say we are targeting a sustainable growth, which means it's not a growth at all cost. So it means that we've been profitable from day one. So it's kind of part of our DNA. I'm not sure I would feel very confident or happy if I was burning a lot of cash, because I think it's maybe put the journey more on the risky side, which maybe we are less enjoying that journey. So in the end, that profitability is part of our DNA. It doesn't mean that sometimes we can't invest more if we feel good growth. But I would say whatever, it's customer first, which means that we are focused on making sure that while we grow our existing customer base, they don't churn, they don't leave. So we have this very important metric, the net retention rate and the gross retention rate. Gross retention rate above 95%. This is a metric we don't want to go below 95%. So I would say we can grow as long as we keep a kind of structural profitability, efficiency, and we are sure that our customer will stay with us on the long term.
Yeah, and that net retention rate suggests there's a lot of investment that goes into your customer success. Once a customer is signed, it's not about signing a customer, setting them up, and then checking back on them once a year to see how things are going. You're really vested in their success, which is one of the reasons that they grow with you, and then continue to come back year after year. You talked about customer number one still being customer 24 years later.
Yeah, and it's not just customer success, it's team, it's the whole company. Everyone has to see that metric and think, okay, how can I influence the success of our customers? And this is kind of a leitmotiv for all employees in the company.
So let's start to look to the future. We've got a few minutes left of the conversation, and we can't move today for all the discussions around what the future of procurement technology is going to be. In fact, what the future of technology is going to be, and then what the impact that is on procurement. How do you kind of look at the landscape in terms of innovation, and how do you then look at that and think, okay, how do I infuse that back into what we do at Ivalua?
It's a big, large question. I would say that we need whatever, that's my feeling, and especially in what we approach things, is we want to build that system of record of that platform that will be the long-term partner for all our customers. So we are careful about all the new innovation and looking at it. For example, we've seen some in the past, like blockchain or this type of thing. We didn't invest much because in the end, we are not hearing a lot of customers asking for that, or we weren't, for example, we are not fully convinced that it will create a big disruption. Now, there are topics that we hear from customers or where we feel much more convinced about the impact. I'm giving two examples. Of course, GenAI. This is something from I would say when I saw ChatGPT, I felt it's like internet. It will be a disruption for procurement. I have no doubt about that. So I dig into that topic. And we decided to do it not just by providing a good use case to customers, but by building it at platform level. So it's our own way of doing things. We love to give the flexibility to customers so that and our partner ecosystem so that they can build what they want on generative AI. So this is one domain where we feel it will disrupt things for the future. Not only because of the value, but I think it will be a disruption in terms of user experience.
Yeah.
The way you interact with the system in general, and we see that in many places, but it will be really impressive. We are working on things that are really impressive. There's other topic where we have also invested a lot. We feel more and more customers that are worried about risk, compliance, sustainability, all this type of topic. And for that, procurement is at the heart of that, and they need a very strong solution to monitor that, to report on that and take action. So we released this environmental impact center on the sustainable part, but there are a lot also of things that have been done on the compliance and risk part. So these are topics where we feel it's important to invest to give the value to our customers.
I see that. Maybe it's always been the case, but it's becoming more to the fore now that procurement is becoming a risk function. And traditionally, we've obviously built the business case of procurement and savings in most organizations, for better or worse, kind of conditioned the folks who pay the procurement bills to think about our value proposition on savings. But now savings is just one part of a much bigger picture. And in some organizations it's useful, in some organizations it's not so much what risk is becoming. I don't think risk is going away, and the focus on risk, and that's an opportunity for us to kind of step into a new arena, if you will, for a lot of procurement professionals that we weren't necessarily in. And obviously we need that technology to help drive our impact in that area. So I think that's exciting times for us as a profession.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Gen AI will bring value on the risk part, because we're building a lot of use case where they can really be alerted of any risk with the Gen AI.
And monitoring. So Gen AI is doing because risk is always, I think that the difficulty for us has always been, how do we go from being reactive to proactive? And I guess that's so some of the generative AI will allow us, what the technology will start driving predictive risk mitigation.
I would say that technology will actually company, they have a lot of data and they are lost in it. Even if you bring good analytic report and all of that, there's too much of it, and so at the end, as you mentioned, they are reactive because they don't have time to interact with data. Data is something that is technical for people. So you put Gen AI in the middle of that, and this is what it will do. Instead of interacting with a database, you're interacting with someone who talks like you. So you can just ask your question and say, okay, is there any risk here? And say, yes, I see a lot of risk because of this data, and this is how it's going to happen, I think.
Yeah, I think that could be one of the most transformational things for procurement in a long time, that you don't need to dig into 3 layers of reporting to try and find this piece of information that you don't really even know how to run the reports, or you've forgotten how to run the reports because it's been so long. You can just ask a question and get your answer to it, very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really the proxy to access your data.
So as we start to wrap up, you work and interact with an awful lot of procurement leaders who are going on their journey to digitize the procurement process. And I just wonder if there's it's hard to distill all the things you see, I know, into a few tips, but anything that you see those who are most successful in implementing technology, in getting the adoption and the stickiness that they need within their organizations, are there certain things that they do that stand out when versus those that may have a little bit more difficulty in really making their investments in procurement technology have such a big impact on their impact?
My feeling is that you need to own the technology as a leader. I mean, you can't say technology is a tool and I can rely on people telling me what technology to take, and I have a business problem, technology is not me. I think we're at a place where technology is part of the what you need to understand and what you need to leverage. So the closer you are to your, not all the system, but the central system of your function, the more the better your decision will be.
Yeah. So owning your tech stack.
Yeah. Not of course the coding and all of that,
No.
but understanding the logic of your data and making sure that you drive that in the good way, and especially what value the technology can bring. Sometimes it's a little bit high level. You have a kind of business case that tells you, oh, you will win that. But if you don't know exactly where it comes from and why, you may not make the good decision about it.
All right, well, David, I want to thank you so much for joining me today on the conversation to dig a little bit into the background of Ivalua and the journey that you've been on, but I think a lot about the culture. And that's one of the things that I always hear in the marketplace is about the Ivalua culture that you've built and that you continue to build. And so thank you for kind of uncovering that a little bit for us within the conversation. So I just want to thank everybody who's listening to us today for joining us. And David, one last time, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Philip.
All right, thanks. Take care, everybody.